Hello, I'm Tim Russ. Live long and podcast.
Hello, and welcome aboard the Captain's Yacht, the interview series where we step away from the bridge, pour a drink, and talk with the creative minds that are shaping the final frontier. And this is a special one today. I am your host, Dave Mader, and we're joined with Live Long and Podcast veteran Jessica Chan. Hi, Jessica.
Hi.
And our very special guest joining us, a writer, producer, and showrunner, Aaron J. Waltke, who is an Emmy-winning writer, producer, and showrunner whose work has helped redefine the modern genres of storytelling. Best known to Star Trek fans as one of the creative forces behind Star Trek Prodigy, Aaron has brought heart, humor, and bold characters-driven storytelling to a new generation of viewers while honoring the legacy of the franchise. His career spans acclaimed animated series, including Troll Hunters, Wizards, The Unikitty, Guillermo del Toro's Tales of Arcadia, where his work has earned both Emmy and Annie Awards, and a lifelong Trek enthusiast. Aaron has become one of the most thoughtful voices in contemporary science fiction, blending world building, emotional depth, and a deep respect for canon. So whether he's crafting sweeping adventures and intimate character moments, Aaron's storytelling continues to resonate with fans of all ages, myself included. So welcome today, Aaron, aboard the Captain's Yacht.
Glad to be here. Wow, what a sweeping introduction. I'll try to live up to it.
Well, I meant every word, and I'm so thrilled to have one of the writers with us today of Star Trek. It was interesting. I was on the Star Trek cruise last year, and all the actors are there, but I think my favorite part was Brandon Braga was there. Sure. And we got to really ask him about different scripts he wrote, the different eras of Star Trek he wrote in. And he's like, "This is okay," and we're like, no, it's fine. We like writers too, if anything more so, because sometimes you ask an actor a Star Trek question and they're like, I don't know, like what was happening. They can tell you about the set or something like that. But
right,
it's a very different perspective. So thank you, Aaron, for being here. This is a live stream, so we are streaming live on YouTube, Twitch, and other places, including Facebook. So we have super fan Sam here. When's Prodigy coming out in Canada? They want to know, Aaron.
It's an excellent question that is so far above my pay grade. I could not even begin to explain how any of that works. Long story short, it comes down to licensing rights. And, our show was on the air at a time when license rights belonged to different regions, and then some of it went to Netflix, but some of it stayed on the home page in different countries. In Canada, I think Crave had the rights to season 1, and maybe the option to pick up season 2, but I don't. That's all I know. But I would love for you to have it. As far as I know, you can buy both Blu-rays, and sometimes they go on sale in Canada. And I think it is available to buy digitally as well. So if you do want to check out the series, definitely, at least you have those options. And, for 40 episodes for like $9 to $15, it's a pretty good deal, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It was on Crave. It kind of got messy because, it's Canadian rights and US rights are separate. However, the fact that season 2 in particular in the US decided to drop all at once, but Canada was trying to do it week to week. It's kind of like, it's difficult because Canada and the US markets, entertainment wise, are so interconnected. It's hard. It's a little difficult to try to do that. So that's why we're like, well, it's all out on Netflix, season 2 at once. So we decided we did like 4 installments, Jessica, as you recall. We were like, the first 5 episodes and the next 5, but and that was a really interesting way to go through it versus a week to week, because a lot of people binge it for sure, but it was interesting to
I mean, it's 20 episodes of story, right? So I think people kept asking me, especially when season 2 came out, how should we watch it? How should we cover it? And I'm like, I can't answer that for you, but I can say that we just like the first season, it was organized in movements of about 5-ish episodes. And so if you binge those 5 and then kind of think about it, that seems like as good a way to do it as any. But you're right. Yeah. I mean, the question of how to release a show and how to garner interest and how to keep fans around It's only become more complicated in the era of streaming, where there's a bunch of different streamers and each one has their different models. And sometimes you have different shows released different ways on different networks or on the same network even. So everybody's just trying to figure out what works best. But certainly it's a different landscape than it was back in the 90s, where you just knew to tune in to this channel at this time for a new show and at this time for reruns, right?
Absolutely. Now, Aaron, I wanted to ask you a small world question, if you will. Well, it in the sense of it's a small world, because we may have like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon separation here. I was looking up your bio and seeing you were from Greenwood, Indiana, and
Yes.
and so my uncle Gerald is a medical doctor. He moved down to Greenwood, Indiana, in 1996 from Canada.
Wow.
And so he put down roots there. My cousins went to high school there, and I'm a year older than you, and so as is my cousin Natalie, and and my other cousin Chris Mater. He's a year younger than you. So you're right in between us. You're right in between us. So I asked my cousin Natalie, do you know Aaron Waltke? And I sent her your bio, and she goes, I think we were in marching band together. Because
now that you say that, I was like, why does that sound so familiar? That's so funny. Yes, we were in marching band together, and she went to Center Grove.
She went to Center Grove. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the high school that we went to.
That's the high school. So she played clarinet. She said she thought you played French horn.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah, yes. Definitely we're in marching band together. That's what a small world indeed. Strange.
Funny.
Yes, and my other cousin Chris, who now lives in he lives now near San Francisco. He played drums. He asked me to ask you about a mutual friend, Brian Handy. If that name means anything.
Ryan, he's good. I think he's still in Indianapolis. If you're watching, Ryan, how you doing, man?
Yes. So there you
he's
go.
in Indianapolis. I think he's actually running for city council. So if you live in his district, consider voting for him.
Yes, absolutely. There you go. Well, all those things, Indiana. Now,
this is a great podcast about Central Indiana.
Well, and I just on that, like I played trombone when I was in band because that was Riker's instrument. So, Sam here's asking, did you pick the French horn because of Picard?
It's an interesting question. I think I picked French horn because of my love of Star Trek, because almost every Star Trek series makes liberal use of the French horn. And even when it came to Star Trek Prodigy's theme, I remember, we were just starting to get our first takes on it back from Michael Giacchino, and then eventually Nami Melamod, who was our series composer and one of his genius proteges. They were like, what do you think? And I was like, this is amazing. Put French horn in it. Like every Star Trek show has French horn. And it's not just because I can hear it because I played it for 4 years. It's because there's just something mellifluous and grand that it evokes that gives it that sort of stately timelessness that I think Star Trek is sort of uniformly known for. It's hearkening to a time that doesn't exist, and yet we all want to exist and feels like it's always been there. And French horn, in my mind, is that way.
I love the French horn myself too. So
I feel left out. I played the flute, so I guess we're all in band, but I kind of always
played a flute,
One time at band camp.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say, besides the obvious of growing up in the late 90s and playing in the early 2000s playing flute, which that sucked for that reason, but I don't know. I was jealous of the horn section. I kind of
sure.
Of course. Well, so 6 degrees of separation confirmed. Good to know. So while we're on the the subject of your early life, you said you been a lifelong Star Trek fan. Like, what first pulled you into Star Trek? Just as a fan, as a viewer? Was it Next Generation, original series, something else?
So I am one of those guys that I just there's never a time in memory that there was not Star Trek in my life. Like, my dad was a huge fan of TOS. And so one of my earliest memories, which I realize now I was 3 years old, was sitting on the couch next to my dad in our old house, and watching, the Jerry Goldsmith fanfare play. And then I remember seeing the saucer separation for the Enterprise D. And I had no idea what was going on, but it felt very exciting because I was feeding off my dad's energy. and
Yes.
And obviously that was one of my earliest exposures to any sort of like science fiction, anything. But I was just like, there's a few occasions in my life where I got thrown in the deep end and just got transfixed. And I think one of the first plays I ever saw, I was like 6 or 7, and my parents took me to see Les Mis. so again, it was in both occasions, like I didn't totally know what was going on, but I was just absorbing it. And that was kind of my introduction to Star Trek. And of course, years later, I realized that was in fact watching the premiere episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation live when it debuted way back in September of 1987.
Right.
And so between that and TOS, I definitely had like a liberal, just like a super saturation where I just kind of got it by osmosis. During the summers, both my parents worked, or sometimes they were busy, and so I would stay at my aunt's house over the summer, and she would just throw on reruns on. And for whatever reason, our local PBS station in the afternoons would air episodes of TOS, and so I think my aunt just thought it was educational, Star Trek or whatever. And the whole time, I that was. Like mind blowing, because I was old enough because I watched like Indiana Jones and stuff that I knew like what Nazis were, for instance. And then suddenly I watch episodes like, what is it, Parallels of Force or Patterns of Force, and I was like, what is this? How are they landing on a planet, like on a Nazi planet? Like that stuff really twisted my brain in ways that I think were as Roddenberry intended, and kind of helped me understand. Between that and Twilight Zone, I was very much a kid out of time, I guess. I watched a lot of reruns from the 60s and 70s.
The 60s.
Which, yeah. And so, like, Twilight Zone was also a big part of my diet going in. So I definitely understood how to use genre as a metaphor to talk about, big ideas and current events through a lens that gets to the basic humanity of things. And I've just been, it's always just been a part of it. I watched every single show. Deep Space Nine absolutely blew my mind. Like, I was not terminally online because that wasn't really a thing when I was a kid. But so I wasn't in like the Usenet forums, but I did watch. I missed like the first season of Deep Space Nine until they started airing it in syndication on my local Fox affiliate. And so every day when I come home from school, they'd air 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine in broadcast order. So I basically got to binge watch Deep Space Nine the first couple seasons. And I was like, this is the best thing I've ever seen in my life. And obviously they were doing some very different things back then as far as like serialization and experimenting with format in a way that some Star Trek fans initially were like, what is this? They're not even on a starship. There's half the cast isn't even in the Federation. But of course now it's widely regarded as one of the best series ever. So, and then obviously Voyager Enterprise.
That always seems to be the cycle with Trek fans. I don't like this. It's different. Actually, you know what? It's a classic. We love it.
That's exactly right, because as you're telling the story of how you got into it, very much the same for me. I'm just a little bit older than you, and my parents were like huge original series fans. When that show debuts in 1987, I'm only like 4. Or maybe going on 5. And, and like, I remember them being excited, but then they watched it and I think my mom liked it more than my dad. My dad's like, where's Kirk? Why isn't this more like original? And then, but then I got into it more as it got syndicated. My friends at school all thought it was cool. So I then thought it was cool. And Deep Space Nine comes along and I'm kind of hung up on dumb things like, why are they wearing a different uniform? And why are they working with these Bajorans and what's going on? And then Michael Dorn comes to the show in season 4. And then I was a huge Worf fan. So I'm like, okay, well, if Worf's here, then I got to like kind of check this out. So then I get really into Deep Space Nine after that and catch up on kind of the stuff I had largely missed in those first couple of years. But then now I look back on it and say, oh, that was probably one of the best Star Treks. Of course, Voyager. I'm a huge fan. That was is we're kind of finishing high school. We're kind of on a similar trajectory there. That's the show.
That was my first one I watched live. Actually, everything else I watched in syndication because I was only one and when they.
Sure, yeah. I was in high school when Voyager was coming out, and I was just so grateful that. Because also like the production value of some of the early seasons, as always, there's like a little bit of wobbliness, just like that's almost like classic Star Trek, that even going back to TOS, like when the doors slammed, you'd see like the cardboard wall wobble a little bit. But with Voyager, everything it was like a machine by that time. Like they knew, everybody knew their parts. All the production crew could swoop in and make everything sort of like, and also the cameras were just a little bit higher res, and so it felt like just firing on all cylinders and appointment viewing for sure.
They could do a little bit more with the exterior space stuff than they had done in Next Gen,
because they'd assembled enough of pipeline and just raw materials of like old spaceships that were in somebody's warehouse that they could always kit bash them together and make something new.
Yeah, they did it a bit, but Next Gen definitely did this the most, where they would just say off camera, something's happening, we've shot weapons. Oh, they fired back. Oh, whoops. Yeah. Okay.
And then you get
if you're lucky, you get a shake or something like that. Maybe someone gets a panel blown up in their face.
Some rocks fall from the ceiling. Emergency room.
Always those deadly rocks hitting people.
Sparks. Somebody goes.
Like, why do people keep putting the rocks inside the panels? But that is a mystery for another time.
There are plenty of explanations, but I don't want to take too much time.
Of course,
I know that you would know that. Though.
Yeah.
And you're a Star Trek fan. Then in high school, you're getting into like theater and writing and things like that. I'm gathering from the connections we've already established. And then did you know you wanted to be like a screenwriter? Did you, what was your aspiration like out of school?
Yeah, I would say growing up for the most part in central Indiana, it was an odd sort of push and pull because as you can imagine, outside of like regional theater or the occasional touring company, there wasn't really like a lot of like stuff going on in Indiana like I could immediately point to and say, oh yeah, I know this guy who writes for TV. Like that doesn't exist really. The house I grew up in was literally between two cornfields, so at best it was sort of like, especially when I went to college, a lot of their like telecommunications program, like there was the theory, which was very good, and they teach you how to use the camera, but they're like, if you play your cards right, you could wrap cables at a Pacers game, like it was never like, oh yeah, you could go be a filmmaker. The closest I had to that was like folks like the folks who had made it out of Indiana, like the Jackson 5 or David Letterman and those folks that kind of took their sensibility. Kurt Vonnegut took their sensibility from approximately where I was from and then kind of transferred it to greener pastures where TV and film and dreams were made. But that didn't stop me. I was a weird little kid that just, I think I had that sort of inner demon that writers like Dostoevsky and Kafka always talk about, that I just had to do it. I didn't know why, so I took my parents' camcorder and me and the kids in the neighborhood would make all these short films and trying to make movies. And, I actually found a script when I was visiting my parents, few years ago, and it was a script I'd written when I was like 6, and sure enough, it was a Star Trek parody of all things.
You were doing Lower Decks before.
Yeah, and this is no knock against. I remember it was really weird, for as you might imagine, a comedy because somebody. I'm trying to like mix the Zucker brothers with Star Trek or something, but I remember like them encountering the original it was like TNG meets the original Enterprise, and they called them like the USS Old Fart or something like that.
At 6 you came up with this is great.
At 6 but I guess it kind of goes to show that kind of remix like canon play was always kind of bouncing around in my head, I guess. And part of that too was just born out of how I bonded with my friends in like middle school, high school, where we would just pick some classic bit of genre and just talk about it endlessly. Lord of the Rings, Dune, All those things were super formative for us. Predator, Terminator, anything from the Cameronverse or Amblinverse, Aliens, like all of it was just sort of like hovering as like the important stuff that we needed to know about and hash out. And so I would write like plays, and we'd shoot short films, and we discovered at one point in high school that our French class, if we shot our final project as like a little short film all in French, we would get A+. And so that became like a challenge for us every year to make it bigger and bigger, until senior year we did like a half-hour like TV special, basically, that was just all the greatest hits,
all in French.
All in French. It was insane. But by that time, I think I had really, like, it wasn't even a bug. I was just fully embracing, like, I love doing this, which I guess is kind of how some other filmmakers certainly got their start, Spielberg and a few others. But then when I was going to college, I was like, all right, I have to be serious. And initially I was looking at like psychology, and I declared a psychology undergrad. But then at some point I just remember turning to my dad and was like, I think I want to make movies for a living. And to their great credit, my dad's a dentist, my mom is an occupational therapist, about as far removed from like filmmaking and the artist life as you can imagine. They said, well, just do your best. And they supported me. And then I got involved in theater and sketch comedy in college, which is great training ground for just being able to churn out like doable work, executable artistry on a short time frame, which is exactly what you have to do in television. And so it wound up being, by the time I got to I was graduating college, I didn't really see any way to back down other than just trying to give it the old college try. So I packed up my stuff, spent a little bit of time in Chicago, a little bit of time in New York, but then eventually kind of gathered up a couple of my other friends that were serious about film, and we all just moved into a tiny apartment in LA, and I've been here for 20 years.
So yeah, it's like that traditional story, like when Keanu Reeves, Jessica, left Toronto and packed everything up and went to Los Angeles.
Yes,
to pursue the dream.
City of Angels, City of Dreams.
Of course. Well, Jessica, did you want to take the next question, or do you want to?
No, you're doing a good job. I'm along for the ride. I'm like Rizzo in the Muppet Christmas Carol.
Yeah, you're here for the food, as they say.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I am here for the food.
Light the lamp, not the rat.
So, you're writing these different projects. You get this opportunity to write for Star Trek. Like, were you just like, okay, like I'm all over it, or was it like, how did that sort of courtship unfold?
Yeah, I mean, so I worked with the Hagemans on one of the first produced TV projects that I ever worked on, which was Troll Hunters, which was back in 2013, I think. And that was an amazing experience. The Netflix ordered 52 episodes, sight unseen. Got to work, and it was a Guillermo del Toro project, and got to work with, it was myself, my writing partner at the time, Chad Quant, who worked on like Wanda, and he's currently the head writer of the new Avatar show, and AC Bradley, who created Marvel's What If, went on to create Marvel's What If, and the Hageman brothers, who created Ninjago, and Mark Guggenheim, who helped create the Arrowverse for the CW, and that was it. It was just like us five, more or less, just thrown into a room and said, "All right, make something." But they always knew I was a huge Star Trek fan. So I think at the time this started to become a possibility, we had offices next to each other at DreamWorks Animation. I was showrunning a show called Wizards, which is sort of the final capstone to the Tales of Arcadia trilogy from Guillermo del Toro. And they were writing the movie that was going to kind of finish everything off. And they kind of came into my office and were like, "Hey, you like Star Trek, right?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." And essentially Secret Hideout, they'd had a meeting with them, and they were interested in doing a Star Trek show that's sort of like YA introduction to Star Trek with the Troll Hunters guys. And I was like, wait, I'm one of like 4 people that meet that description. So I was, of course, all about it for sure. And so there's a couple times where they came while they were developing the show, they came up with the pitch of like kids find a starship and use it to escape their prejudicial circumstances and explore the stars. And I was like, does that pass the smell test? And I said, I think that works. And it's really interesting because I've never seen that in Star Trek, where instead of it being, humans seeking out new life and new civilizations and going boldly into the final frontier, it's the inverse, where you start with those strange new life and civilizations and discovering Starfleet. And I really loved that concept, especially because I knew better than anybody, because people had always asked me as a Star Trek fan, like, hey, where do you start with Star Trek? And I'm like, I don't know, binge like 5 seasons of these 3 shows and then you'll kind of absorb it and get the hang of it. But that's a lot to ask, I think, of people sometimes, especially in this age where there's so much content out there, and people are reluctant to commit to something if they can't get it right off the bat. So I knew there was a need for it. And so I just kind of gave little suggestions of like, hey, if you want to have somebody who's like a representative of Starfleet who could conceivably be on this ship for however long it was there, why don't you make it a hologram? And holograms are often based on real living beings, even though they can become their own characters. Like Dr. Zimmerman became the model for the Doctor. Very different characters, but there's obviously a lot of similarities. I think Bashir was scanned at one point for that.
Barclay had a hologram, and
yeah, exactly. So like these emergency holograms or what have you clearly are always based on a human being, or often are, I should say. So it felt like a great way to kind of cleverly tie in as an entry point, like the first rung on the ladder of like, this is classic Star Trek, hang on for dear life.
and just what's the exact, I'm just trying to understand, because the show hits the market in 2021, right? So yeah. You're talking about like you're working with the Hagemans in 2013 or roughly. So I'm just trying to understand, like, how long does a show like this take to make, like from the beginning? And
so I worked in 2013 on Troll Hunters with the Hagemans, and then I think they first pitched the series end of 2018, something like that, for Star Trek. And then it was a pretty fast development cycle because there was a real hunger to make this show. So I think this was like as Paramount Plus was ramping up, and there's a new CEO, and he was like, we're just going to make some stuff that's in this different direction. And so I think by July, the writer's room had opened. But then after that, we obviously had to write 20 episodes. And then even beyond that, you have to animate all of them, and you have to kind of create because it's CGI, but you have to do this on any show. You have to create every single asset from scratch. You have to hire artists, you have to hire animators, compositors, and then editors and musicians. All of that takes a long time. CGI, it takes even longer. So because there's just a few extra steps. So like we started, like the room opened in 2019. The pilot started being written, I think, in early, January 2019. And then the first episode premiered in 2021. So that kind of gives you an idea of like from the very first to the very
almost 3 years. Not quite.
Yeah, about 2.5 years, I think. And part of that was just because it was a brand new, very complicated show and in the middle of production, we also got hit by COVID, if you remember that little chestnut. So that also there was a little bit of disruption there, and we were just trying to figure out how to make the series in unprecedented times. But the flip side of it is we figured it out, and then by season 2, a lot of the issues we were running into weren't issues anymore because we'd already done it. We already done it in much harder circumstances.
Yeah, and you I love the voice cast of Prodigy. It's one of the best, not just in Star Trek. I think it's one of the best assembled audio voice casts put together that I can remember. Yeah. And do you already know that you're working with these actors when you're starting to write those first episodes, or is that coming later?
Sometimes you can write with a particular actor in mind. I think when we started writing Dr. Noam, and we wanted somebody who appears midway through the season of the first season, and We wanted somebody who could be a great Tellurite foil to, of that sort of curmudgeonly, but in kind of a heartfelt way. And we were like, all right, that's going to be Jason Alexander. I can't think of anybody else. And similarly, when we were writing Jankum Pog, I think everybody in the room was like, oh, he's definitely like a Jason Mantzoukas character, like the equivalent of like the guy who lives in his mom's basement, maybe a couple years longer than he should, and just plays video games all the time. Like that. Right? That's almost and so sometimes you can write that way, but honestly, a lot of it came down to casting, which is kind of like the traditional way you do these things. You write the part in the sort of archetypal sense, and then you create sides and write character descriptions and kind of send them out, and then casting directors who are brilliant at their jobs will be like, oh, I think I know what you're talking about. Are you talking about this type of character actor? And then either they'll go to that actor, or they'll already have a Rolodex of like 5 people that are in that realm, and then they'd have them audition, read some lines, and then we all have a discussion of like if we want to have callbacks or who's close or who's top 3. And that's how most of the cast was chosen, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting because, of course, you got Ella Purnell, who is now a breakout star on Fallout, live action, of course.
But at the time, I think she was in like one indie movie, and that was it. But we heard her voice, and I think Kevin especially, but all of us agreed. Were like kept saying like there's something about that voice that feels very Gwendala. That there's like a woundedness and like a tiredness, but also a strength. And that's what I think we all really wanted. And so she just kept floating to the top of the list. Interestingly enough, I think number 2 in that list was an actress who's a dear friend of mine, Bonnie Gordon, who we loved her so much that we not only did she help us with Scratch before we had fully cast Gwen. She did like the character for Scratch for us, but also we cast her as the ship computer, the voice of the protostar. And we do all kinds of conventions and stuff with her. And it's a very strange, imperfect process, but that's part of the fun too, is just kind of assembling your troupe.
And did they all record their lines separately, or were they ever together?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is really nice to get everybody together, but it can be a very difficult thing, especially if everybody's really busy. And
you have COVID in there too, I'm sure.
In our case, we had COVID, so that kind of answered it for us. But on top of that, half of our cast live in the UK, so in theory, we could have done scenes where, like, I guess Zero and Gwen were together. We tried to book it, but ultimately in many cases, it's easier just to record separately, unless it's absolutely critical. So there were some actors that I didn't meet in person until like the premiere.
Wow. Well, and because I was only asking, with Ella's case, and like she's working, across John Noble, and so she's just recording her lines, and then they're being put together, because you could never tell, because it feels very natural, and they're both so skilled at what they do. Like Jessica and I do these live script reads, like we'll do on this channel just for fun. Like we'll read like an old Next Gen episode, and we'll divvy up the parts. But and like Jessica's our most talented one, so I always find that the people who are they kind of elevate each other, like play, if you what's that trope, if you play against a really good golfer, it will make you a better golfer, sort of thing.
Sure.
And it was such an amazing team you put together for this. I was like, wow. And like, it's even more impressive if they're not playing off each other.
I know everybody was a total pro. And part of that too is like when we would do, oftentimes when we were recording, many of them, especially Kate Mulgrew, wanted someone to play off of. So we would have our voice actor, sometimes even us, like read the lines with the correct intention that she was playing off of, and then she would bounce off that. So there was, it's not like they were just talking to a tennis ball, and like how some movies are made these days. There was a person on the other end, that there was because acting is reacting, and especially a lot of these actors are very good actors, and like to be able to play off of that.
Of course.
I don't have this is a question you have later, but I know Sam had the same question. Why did you go with like, was the Voyager for like the kind of, when you were thinking of the hologram, and like what was the like, why was Voyager the one that you were going to connect the series to the rest of like the wider Trek universe?
Well, there's a few kind of reasons that came together that made it the obvious choice for us. One was just from a fan perspective. This is a discussion we had very early on of like, let's nail down the exact year that we want this to be, because we knew it was after Voyager, but how far, because there's a gap of about 20 years between where a lot of the movies end and where Picard, for the most part, picks up. And so we wanted to be close enough that it, because I think for so many fans out there, yeah, sure, the movies kind of showed a tiny little sliver of like what was going on with at least the TNG crew after the series ended. But in terms of just like timeline and the world and that sort of thing, Voyager was like kind of where a lot of our brain cursors stopped. And then obviously they went back and did a prequel series with Enterprise. But so many, including myself, are like, but what happens next? and so it kind of made sense to us from that meta perspective to start at Voyager and then work our way backward and introduce all the other Star Trek stuff. And then also from a narrative and character standpoint, as I alluded to before, there's that question of, okay, if there is an emergency training hologram, someone that you would summon to help like whip a crew into shape, a motley crew, as it were, who would that be based on? If it's an emergency hologram, you're probably activating them in less than ideal circumstances. And we were like, okay, well, and we also, for our young crew, who essentially were all orphans, it'd be nice if there was somebody who was sort of like a mother or father figure, or at least an avuncular figure who you would understand and both be stern, but also you could tell they care. And who better than like, say, a captain who was thrown into the Delta Quadrant with half a crew launched prematurely, had to assemble a motley cavalcade of half Federation, half Maquis who hated them, throw in a few aliens they picked up 70,000 light years from home, and then build them into a family that could navigate the most impossible situation that a Starfleet captain could ever face. And of course that's Janeway. And also, of all the captains, I think you could argue that Janeway had the most mentorship of young people in her crew too, especially with like Kess to a certain degree, but also Naomi Wildman and
Seven of Nine,
who in some ways was like learning to be a human and going through those sort of like, maturity that she kind of missed because she was abducted before, almost like in an Arrested Development kind of way. And so it all just made sense. And like we kept coming up with, but like we'd kick the tires, like, are we sure we don't want to try someone else? And then we talk it through, and it was like, actually, it makes more sense for it to be Janeway again. So
right.
That was where I think we landed on it. And then once we started building out the season, we realized that, we wanted to have a Hunt for Red October or the Fugitive kind of a narrative where an actual Federation ship that was sent to track down the protostar, what happened to it and its crew, would follow. And we knew by episode 6 that would be Chakotay would be the captain. And just because of a sort of narrative irony, it's like, well, who would care the most to get him back? And of course, it would be, his commanding officer, who had a very close relationship with him, however you wanted to find it. And it just felt narratively, it made sense for that to be like, if you already have the modeling clay of this character, rather than just sort of playing with it and then putting it back on the shelf, our attitude was always like, let's use that and really explore it as much as we can, especially in an ensemble show with a bunch of different characters, but we still have to tell it in 22 minutes.
Right.
It was amazingly done. Like, honestly, it was just I loved it as a Voyager fan, and it gave like a bookend to that series that I think was very like lovely. But also like I think as we watched, we were always kind of thinking like tried to remove Trek from our brains and be like, how would like young people kind of take in this storytelling? But I mean, obviously I can't know for sure, but it did feel like even if you knew nothing about Trek, like it felt like there was something there that like it worked so well. I feel for like old Trek fans and new Trek fans. I think like you guys hit that balance like perfectly in my opinion.
For sure. Well, I'm with you too, Jessica. And like the other thing I'm trying to understand too is like at the time, so you come out in 2021, but like these other Star Trek shows are happening as well, right? So there's obviously Discovery, but Picard and Lower Decks, they both come out in 2020, and they're kind of not quite in the same. Well, Lower Decks is actually in the same decade, but as Prodigy is taking place. But like Picard comes out, and they're saying, okay, like this is like 20 years later, right? So like how much do you have to be concerned with what they're doing on those shows and sort of factor that all in? Is again like do your scripts just go through some kind of approval process to make sure that they're not contradicting anything that's not going on in the other shows?
I mean it was a little tricky, I think, just because obviously canon was being built on either side of us while we were doing it, but there was enough people that cared deeply about that stuff on all of the shows that we kind of just formed a little committee and made sure that all the shows had access to all of the scripts and had dedicated readers to make sure that anything new that came down the pipeline, we'd be aware of it. And then if something came up where like, we used Okona, Captain Okona in our show, and then Lower Decks was like, oh, we have him as like a throwaway gag 3 years earlier. And we were like, and so we looked at both and we're like, oh, that's fine. Just give him an eye patch. and it worked out. But there were obviously more complicated ones. Like for instance, navigating the use of Wesley Crusher, because we were obviously using Wesley Crusher. Sorry this is spoilers for people who haven't seen Prodigy yet. But we use Wesley Crusher on our series. And by this time he's a traveler, as seen in TNG. But then they decided they wanted him to make a cameo in Picard season 2. And so there was this question of like, okay, how does this work? How do the timelines line up? And then his mother, Beverly, also becomes like a minor character on our show. And so there was that further question of how that evolves with what they did with season 3. But thankfully, like I'm friends with everybody. I know Terry very well. I know Akiva, and I know Mike. And whenever something of necessity came along that we had to discuss, I guess the nature of canon or whatever, we would have we'd sit down and have this sort of open forum. And sometimes we'd come to a consensus. And then for instance, with Wesley Crusher, it was a meeting with me, the Hagemans, and Akiva, and we all just kind of sat down and hashed out the fundamentals of where in the timeline he was at different times. And then I went off and wrote like a 10-page document for everybody to reference, and it was fine. But for I think there's always a way to make things fit and make things connect. And I think most Star Trek fans know that, because for many years there was a lot of stuff that simply contradicted because back in the 1960s, the idea of like a show surviving in syndication for any substantive amount of time, let alone being the bedrock of 60 years of stories, I think was just completely beyond what they were doing. So sometimes they even like contradicted themselves a little bit in the series. And so then it was kind of left to us, the fans, who then went on to become people that worked on the show in some way or another, to create this sort of exegesis to make all the pieces fit together. And that's kind of the fun of world building, I think, is like sometimes you are painted into a corner, but then you get to kind of go back to first principles and say, okay, how could this still make sense? And then it opens up this whole avenue of creativity. And then, which in turn opens up new possibilities for new stories to tell. So that's my favorite thing in the world.
I'm so impressed you did that for Wesley, because I feel like, no shade to Dr. Who, but you could have just been like, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. It's just,
yeah.
I think they actually do say timey wimey in the show, don't they?
Totally.
Yes.
hand wave that away with his, all of his powers. But I am impressed. Yeah, I mean, you could tell honestly. Like I can see, like we always talked about watching Prodigy. Like you could feel the love and like attention you guys put into like every little aspect of the show. Like it just the whole thing. It really shows, even if you don't get to see exactly how much work or what work you guys put in, but it really
Sure.
showed in the final product.
Like some of my favorite episodes, especially during like the when it was Deep Space Nine and Voyager were going side by side for those years, and there was like the episode where the Doctor goes to that ship, and is working with Andy Dick, the other EMH Mark II, and they're talking about the Dominion War, and we don't know anything about that, and of course, as the fans, especially if you watch Deep Space Nine at the time, you're like, oh, we know all about the Dominion War and everything else, but it's interesting to see your characters learn about these things later on when B'Elanna Torres and Chakotay find out about the Maquis getting wiped out, and how that affects her, right? And how these different characters cross over. When Louis Zimmerman was on Deep Space Nine in Dr. Bashir, I presume. Like all that was a lot of fun. So I was always kind of looking for these crossovers too, right? Like because it's that's the strength of this interconnected universe. And we kept asking ourselves, like, well, when's like, I don't know, maybe this is still in the plans or was in the plans for Prodigy, but we're like, well, Lower Decks is set at the exact same time, roughly, like within a year or so. They're both animated. It seems like this would be the most natural crossover of some kind to do, even though the tones of the two shows are very different and everything else. But
we always talked about it, but we also want to step on each other's toes. Like I would have loved to have had like Tindy show up. And you see where she landed, but the problem was, like, if we showed that, then we're locking in Mike to that fate, and so like any shows that crossed over, it'd have to be handled in a very delicate, specific kind of way that we could have made it work, but we also wanted to justify it, because we, as I kind of alluded to before, we didn't want to just have somebody pop up and say, remember this? Cool. All right, bye. Our rule on Prodigy was like, if a character shows up, there's always that question of like, not only how is it going to affect our young crew's journey, but also we wanted their encounters on our show to affect that character moving forward. And that was, and I think people tended to appreciate that we took that time with a lot of these characters instead of just showing them appearing, and we kind of use them as these sort of like platonic ideals that we kind of shuffle around and then they walk out without having changed. I think people like characters because they like seeing them evolve and grow and overcome struggle and have some sort of emotional revelation because of that. And I think that was always our first principle. So if we did have a Lower Decks character show up on our show, I think it probably would have changed them in some way. And so but Mike was so under the gun of trying to find a way to make his own characters land the plane. We didn't want to make it too much more complicated than it already was.
For sure. Like I get that too. And like, the crossover they did with Strange New Worlds was great. And we love that. But I was always like, give me this Prodigy Lower Decks cross in some way. Like you could have gone over there, or they could have came, someone.
Yeah, I think it would have been trickier for them because they took place sort of like before all of the events of our show. So like they would have had to have shown up at Tars Lamora or something. or if they encountered one of the Voyager crew, maybe if Chakotay was on their show or something, then he could have mentioned he was about to go on a trip, for his maiden voyage of the Protostar. But I think there was one point where we had talked about, there's one episode where Tindy has like a slime worm, like a little worm creature that as a pet, and we talked about maybe they could turn it into a melanoid slime worm, just as a little allusion to our series with Murph. But I think we just couldn't make it work because of the timing and where they were in production or something. But I love crossovers, and I was so delighted when they did that when they approached us to do that on Starfleet Academy, and we were like, yes, please. And we
it's not Rock Talk, right? It's a brick
car.
No,
it's a Brokar. It's a brick car named, I think, Orin or something like that. But they used our model as like a starting point of what brick car looked like, and at least as juveniles. And also they name check our crew and our cast and crew in the pilot episode when one of the characters is going to the doctor who is on that show.
Sam was asking.
Sam goes to the doctor asking for mentorship, and she straight up says, like, you mentored, the crew of the Protostar with Captain Gwendala and Dal and whatnot. So it was like, and they appear on that giant board of Starfleet graduates. So it was really nice and very sweet. Noga and Alex are huge fans of our series. Noga, one of the first things she did was watch our entire series, even the animatics for season 2, because she knew that ours was one of the series that did the most with, how education works and how Starfleet works. Because before that, there's a handful of episodes with that, like First Duty or whatever that took place at Starfleet Academy, but very little really delved into it until our series.
Right.
It was always fun watching it to always be like, oh, what episode? Like, what's the lesson that's like, oh, this is like the time loop, or this is the first contact episode, or this is the holodeck episode. It was always fun.
That was really fun, especially early on, was breaking down Star Trek to its constituent components and say, if you had to explain the cool stuff about Star Trek to a complete stranger who had no idea what any of it was, what were the fundamentals you'd want to get across, and how can we find a way to turn those on their heads so even longtime Star Trek fans might have fun with it. So
it was really fun. Well done.
It was fun. Like, Jessica, mother of 2, we were watching it from a perspective of, like we're, millennial Star Trek fans who grew up on Next Gen and Deep Space Nine and the rest of it. But, like, how is this going to speak to a new generation, like to our kids? It's something I think Star Wars did exceptionally well with some of their animated series in like the 2000s, was kind of like after coming off of those prequels, was like bringing in all these new types of fans, a whole new generation, right? And now we see, Star Wars so big. It always was, but there was a big shift, I feel like, after the prequels happened, where Star Wars then became the #1 science fiction franchise. And not that it's all about numbers and competition, but I would love if Star Trek had, more younger people, engaged with it and seeing it, right? And so that's why I was like, okay, I totally get what we're trying to do with this Prodigy show, and loving that aspect of it. My son was already grown up, so he was already past that era, but like, kudos to you for that, because I think it was like really important to, like, okay, how can we do something that's educational, speaks to this new generation, but is also faithful to what it is, and it's all canon, and like, I think you did a really good job with the show, just like Lower Decks did. Like, this is all together, this is all the same, even though it doesn't feel like it can be. The live action, the animated, like the more serious tone of your show versus the more, I don't know, goofy sort of out the window tone of like Lower Decks, for instance, and how that all kind of comes together.
I think Star Trek itself has always pushed the boundaries of, like, even going all the way back to the original series. Trouble with Tribbles is a straight up comedy episode. like we got too many little fuzzballs everywhere. Like, they even do the Dick Van Dyke, like, too much stuff in the closet falling out, but it's just Tribble falling out of a overhead compartment. Like, that was slapstick comedy at the time it was being made. And that's what I always love about it. It's like Star Trek is a vessel. It's a container for story and humanity, even when you're dealing with characters that aren't strictly human.
Right. And just like the crew you put together in this show, I really love, like, the voice actors we've touched on, but like, just like the diversity of, like, and Jessica, I think we really felt this while we were watching the series. It was like, we really got to know these characters. I think for you in particular, Rock Talk was somebody you became very, sort of, attached with, and we're just like, well, I want to see more of these characters. I want to see them in live action or in animated versions, and I'm sure you've been asked this, what is the future of Prodigy as a show, because it feels like it's paused on some level. But
I mean, the answer is I don't know. I think there's a lot of sort of open questions and they're still figuring it out, because obviously it's not a secret that Paramount, Skydance bought Paramount, and now Paramount is looking at merging, and so there's a lot of question marks of like what the next 10 years of Star Trek is going to be. And I have no answers. I'm just glad that it's going to continue to exist in some form or another.
As I can tell you, I want to know what happens to them. Like, I want to know, like, maybe that will come up here in Academy, because the Doctor, who knew them, as we've established, but that's like 800 years ago for him. So it's kind of like, okay, well, whatever their story was, it's long since passed. Well, unless there's some time travel shenanigans, and there very well could be, because that was baked into Prodigy from the beginning. But like I do want to see what happened to them, like, with Gwyn and Dal, and how they were going to sort of move forward. And as these, because especially with that particular era that you were touching upon there, like it's right after that, the whole the Mars attack, and the Romulan
was coming, and there's some interesting stuff in that space that is only like alluded to in other series or even the Kelvinverse movies. I agree. And I mean, if you know anything about me, I don't ignore that stuff.
I want more.
I think you did such a great job also, like, threading that line of like, I felt like you gave us a really solid ending. Like, if that's all we ever get, it's sad, but like I feel like complete, like that you gave us the end of that story arc that we were watching, but left it open. Like, but I don't feel like incomplete. Like, you guys kind of landed that ship really well. And
thank you. It's always, especially in this day and age, you never know. And 40 episodes in 2026 is a very good run for a television series. So if that's it for Prodigy, then I'm very proud and happy with where it landed. But I also have a sneaking suspicion, just the way that Star Trek is, there's always like the possibility to pick up those threads in the next generation of shows or movies or what have you. And so I would say never say never. Like, we're us Trekkies are like the cockroaches of the franchise world. Like, we just keep surviving every nuclear apocalypse.
The actor who plays
I was gonna say, that's a great thing about animation too. You don't have to worry about like aging actors or anything. You can kind of come back, slip back in 20 years. And
I'm trying to think of the actor who plays Okona, Billy Campbell. Yeah, but I'm sure he was like, what, you want me to do more Okona?
I think he was delighted. I think he was surprised, but delighted.
Right, like 30 something years later, right?
And it was actually his idea to kind of like, they were like, don't make him the super like suave hero he was. Like, like let's see, have the years not be kind to him. And we're like, all right, if that's the direction you think you'd be okay with, we're totally open to explore that.
Yeah, and that worked well. And the other thing I really loved, like near the end of the show, well, I loved how you brought in Chakotay. I thought that was my favorite part, I think, of the whole series. Was my favorite line, I think, is when Janeway says at the end of that season 1 midway cliffhanger, like, Chakotay, I'm coming for you. Right. And I'm just like, oh, you hit me in like the feels with that. Because like they're a really strong captain first officer dynamic that doesn't, get its due, I think, in a lot of ways. Like, people talk about Kirk and Spock, of course, and Riker, Picard, and all that. But I think Chakotay and Janeway, one of my favorites. You did so much with that, like the emotions, even though it's animated, like the emotions that touched upon their faces, and like that hologram scene where she's like looking at him there, and like, I'm coming for you. And then when you at the end of that season 2, you're like, okay, and Chakotay is back, and now he's the new captain of the Voyager A. And I was like, wow, I want to know about that now. I want to know what those adventures are. I want to see what the next era of Voyager could have been, because, just because the original one was done. But I felt like, Janeway to a certain extent was promoted and she became part of the Admiralty, that like she had kind of moved on from that stage from her career. But I still want more of those stories. I didn't want any of these shows to end. I didn't want Next Gen to end when it ended, or Voyager, or any of them. They could have kept going.
That's kind of the magic of a crew that you love, right? Is that you just want to keep seeing stories and new adventures and new missions. And I think, at least in spirit, that's why Star Trek keeps chugging along, is because that kind of speaks fundamentally to who we are as a species. Is we are fundamentally curious, and there is some innate drive to always see what's over the next horizon let's see what's on the other side of that ice formed land bridge or that next Polynesian island cluster. Let's see what's on the other side of the moon and the stars, because as we venture and discover new things about the universe, we discover more about ourselves. And my hope is that spark of the human condition never fizzles out.
Oh, myself as well. I think like just the continuity of this, 60th year of Star Trek this year, and it's a wonderful thing. It keeps going here, and editions like this are still coming along. Not as frequently as I would like, not as much as I would like sometimes, but I definitely love it. And animation, I think, being this other realm that has only been barely touched upon, because you go back to the animated series from the 1970s, which I'm not the hugest fan of, spoilers, but it's okay. Like I love the original series, and so it's got a lot of that in there. But I think it's just that 1970s animation that throws me off.
Yeah, I love it, but there are definitely some elements that you have to embrace. It's very 1970s filmation camp, like giant Spock and that sort of thing. Like you just have to just get on its wavelength, right?
Right, and like Lower Decks being like more in that Simpsons style, I suppose, and then yours being like a CGI show. And
by the way, that's also the beauty of Star Trek, is like not even just like if you don't like a series, there's plenty of others. It's like if you don't like an episode, like just wait till next week and it could be something totally different. Like if you don't like Star Trek when it's funny, wait till next week. It'll be like a horror movie, and then the week after that, it'll be like a trial movie. Like it contains multitudes, and that's what I think that's its enduring strength.
What about animation in particular? Did you feel gave you a strength in that show?
Well, I think for Prodigy, we were in an interesting balancing act where we wanted it to feel familiar enough to Star Trek's aesthetic, because even though we were starting way outside the Federation, but as we introduced those elements, we wanted to see both that, okay, this is part of like Star Trek, but we also aesthetically were kind of balancing the Berman era of like, TNG, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and then what they were doing on Picard, and in some ways Discovery. Like there's two distinct styles at play, and we were in the transitional phase of trying to balance both while also creating our own identity. And it was a very difficult balancing act, but I think our production crew did a really good job of finding elements of both and making it feel. And we also had the benefit of our ship, for instance, being an experimental long range vessel. So, and you have experience like that, like the oh gosh, what is it called? Not the Proteus, Prometheus, the USS Prometheus that you see in Voyager, and where they're like, oh, this is a very different Star Trek ship, but it's the cutting edge, and the Federation loves doing weird experiments like that. So it was tricky, but we also tried to stay confident and stay the course and say, let's just do what we think is right. And fans seem to have gotten on board with it.
That's right. Because in the original, was the Prometheus the one that the Doctor goes to, or is the Prometheus the one that it pretended to be? Yeah, it is that one, right?
Where the Doctor goes over and finds the EMH Mark II, played by
Andy Dick.
Andy Dick.
Yeah, that's one for the ages. Go ahead.
I like the stylistic of the like Prodigy. I felt like almost like it. You guys, the first episode, I felt like I was kind of watching. I was like, this kind of reminds me of like Star Wars, like very action heavy. I felt like you almost like ease kids into it. Like you grab them and then you kind of ease them into the Star Trek aesthetic. Because I guess if you started on the starship, it'd be kind of very like often the decks are very stark and kind of But I felt like you guys kind of really
and very formal, right? Like because Starfleet's so serious, and like your characters were like not that. They were just kind of a mismatch of people thrown together, outcasts, like sort of orphans, if you will, and that they have to kind of figure it out. But I love but then you have the Janeway hologram to kind of explain, well, this is how this works, and this is how you can go. So very really smart.
For sure. It was. I think there was one critic who described our show as like performing a magic trick, where at first you think it's one thing and you make a bunch of presumptions, and then episode by episode, moment by moment, it slowly kind of weaves this sort of like tapestry in the background, and it's Star Trek. It's Star Wars kids escaping into the Star Trek universe and showing why that's so much better. And that's sort of what we're doing.
Well, it is.
Yeah,
for sure.
I honestly, I just remember our reviews. I was always like, it's so clever. They're so clever. Like every episode.
She was. Well, okay. So then with the voice actors, I know we touched upon this, like, a lot of the times they were recording them separate, but then the first season comes out, and then did you see all that come together, and did you say, okay, I want to do this with this character, I want to give them this arc, or something you had maybe planned out in the beginning that you kind of had to pivot to based on what had come on screen up to that point?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's easy to kind of fall into this illusion that whenever you make a TV show, every single character arc is planned out from the beginning, and that's the only way to make a good TV show. And I think my philosophy has always been you should have strong ideas of character and a good idea of what their arc is going to be, but you also have to have a certain openness to play. I think it was Wynton Marsalis who said, good jazz is leaving space for God to walk into the room. And I guess what he meant by that is just like you have a foundation and a structure, but you also leave open an opening for inspiration. And as long as you're true to the characters, I find, and their story, oftentimes it means even if you have best laid plans of like, oh, by episode 15, this is going to happen, and episode 16 to 20, this is going to, and then as you're exploring the character, you realize you've like moment by moment, scene by scene, you might realize, oh, actually that revelation we were saving for 20 works better for episode 10. And then it would set up a more interesting revelation for episode 20. And so there's always a certain malleability, but under the umbrella of staying true to the story that you're telling. And I think there are some hallmarks we always knew we were going to be writing towards. For instance, like we knew that they were going to get back to Starfleet by episode 20, but there was going to be like a choice and an imperfect outcome that would open up new possibilities for story in future seasons. We knew that at first they think Starfleet is going to be the answer to all their problems, but by the end it's they themselves that save Starfleet in some way and allow it to and change Starfleet for the better. Those sort of ideas sort of gestate in the back of your mind, and as you're pitching ideas and spending hours and weeks in the room talking, like, does this feel right? How can we explore this? And then it's slowly like the cathedral will assemble itself around you as long as you stay true to those fundamentals. So yeah, that was kind of where we were at with the,
like, did you know, like, I guess with Dal in particular, because, he ends up kind of realizing, well, maybe I'm not the captain, or maybe I'm not the leader. Maybe it's actually Gwyn. Was that sort of known from the beginning, or did you come to that stage? Because it feels like when you're watching the episodes, like you're not really sure. It's almost like this kind of competition in a way.
Well, I think when you're talking about the fundamentals of who a character starts out with, and then what do they think they want, and then by the end of it, what do they need, and what is the most interesting growth for a character? And usually it's like taking them from a place of comfort and obviousness, and then if you can get them to a point where they accept something that is fundamentally different from what they assumed about themselves and about the world and their place in it, usually that kind of growth is the most interesting. And so for us, it was a matter of, if Dal starts in a place of just assuming he has to be captain, and assuming he has to be in command, and assuming he has to be free to do whatever he wants at any time and pull the ripcord and escape any situation, because that was the really uncertain place that he was brought up in, to trust no one and to support no one but himself. By the end of it, what's the most interesting place we could take a character by that? And that's someone who realizes that this sort of mythical place of the captain is an ephemeral thing. We say it right in the finale of this of season 2, of just like a captain's chair is something you're a steward of. Many came before and many will come after. And being part of that legacy and supporting it and being part of the whole that does something greater than what any of you can achieve, is in some ways more noble than simply getting the prestige and the accolades and the titles.
It's
and
not a
that
throne, I suppose.
yeah, and that feels like a really interesting place for a character like Dal to land. And that was, we knew we were going that direction for most of the series, but then when we found a way for it to really elegantly click into place, it felt like that's the way it should always be.
Mm-hmm.
I was always amazed how much you guys fit into like 22 minutes per episode, but I felt like we were talking about like you're introducing Star Trek, but you're also giving these characters an arc. But like as a mom, I was watching, and yeah, there's so much tiny times that I feel like you guys really put in like really good messages for kids to just take away, like, which I think is what kind of Star Trek is all about. But you guys always did that, and like I loved Dal's arc for that reason, because so many, especially like in this current climate, like, you know, oh, I'm second to someone, like, oh, that makes me less than, like, just learning, like, yeah, that whole, like, I can be any part of the crew. That doesn't make me less valuable. That doesn't mean someone win over me. Like, I love that story arc for him. But yeah, I just always amazed. Like, you guys had so many layers going on, but there's so much I felt like as a mom, like, I loved what kids could take away from this and like in their own personal lives beyond just learning about Star Trek. But
and just ask you on that point there, Aaron, because you start as a member of the writers' room and then become head writer, showrunner, like for season 2.
Yeah.
Right?
So I on season 1, I was still wrapping up show running on the series Wizards, and so I was but because of where we were at in production, I was able to like kind of moonlight as a writer and producer on season 1, and then by the time season 2 rolled around, I was all done with that. And I was lucky enough that they were like, hey, you want to come back and be head writer and co-executive producer for season 2? And I was like, yes, I would. Let's do it. So that's how that evolved. But the first season, I was part of the writer's room with a bunch of other talented writers.
What's that like? I guess to Jessica's point there, like where you go from being a member of the bridge crew to being, I guess, the captain, right? And what's that dynamic like?
Well, I something that the Hagemans and I both always try to treat it very as egalitarian as we can, you know, as far as just as Captain Picard will always take all of his crew into the observation room and talk out every scenario. Very rarely was it ever a sort of top-down thing anyway. So the transition for me to have a little bit more overview and say so in the writing of it wasn't too dramatic of a shift, because I think everybody still had a say and I still had a say and everything, but we all tried to work together to make the best story possible. Really what it came down to is just there's a lot more work for me in rewriting scripts and help being in the planning stages of things to make sure that we were on a solid sort of structure in both in our show and the greater Star Trek universe, and which I'm happy to take on that responsibility.
Right. Well, you did an excellent job. I know we're past an hour here, and I do not want to keep you for too long. So we have a few last questions that we'll get through.
Sure.
And, so on that, like, what advice would you give to aspiring writers, especially those who want to work in animation or any kind of genre?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting, shall we say, time for television and animation in particular. But I think the one thing that remains true, and perhaps more true than ever, is the people that find their way and succeed are the ones that find a way to make it for themselves. So the tools to do something truly unique and interesting have never been easier. So my suggestion is, like, learn the craft as best you can. Don't just turn your creativity over to other people or a machine or whatever. Find a way to actually make something unique and do, for instance, what AI cannot do. And that's inject an intentionality and a soul into your work. To that end, I would suggest surrounding yourself with the most talented people that you know, the craftsmen, the artisans, the editors, the camera people, whatever, and just collaborate and make stuff and make it your own, and think about the things that you love and why you love them, and try to tease that out into your own work. Make something, put it out into the world, and then do it all over again and try to make it even better. And sooner than later, you'll realize that just by osmosis and by repetition and by experience, you'll have gotten really good at something, and other people will kind of come along for the ride. And maybe you'll get a chance to launch a Patreon, or you'll do a Kickstarter, or you'll create a thing that goes viral and catches the attention of people who want to see what you can do with a larger budget. Like that's the way I think you have to be scrappy. And I think that's the way that art is going to survive and thrive, is because we always are the survivors that find a way to make stuff happen, even in the strangest of circumstances.
100%. Well said. Thank you for that answer. And what's next for you? What else is going on in your life?
Well, right now, among other things, I have a few projects in the works, one of which has been announced. I'm currently developing a series for Amazon Prime Video called Wings of Fire, based on the amazing epic fantasy series written by Tui Sutherland. If you have any teenagers in your life in the last 10 years, ask them. I guarantee you they've heard of it, if not read every one of the books.
Well, yeah.
But we're developing that right now. It's a really cool project. And I have a couple other things in the works that I hope I can talk more about soon. So if you want to keep up to date, you can follow me on all the social media. I usually go by the handle of Good Aaron. That's GOODAARON. And as soon as I can talk about something, I will post it on all the social medias.
Well, Aaron, that is amazing. Thank you so much for being with us today and taking this time. I would like to ask you for an obligatory shout out, just for our, as you saw that we had Tim Russ at the top, who did, say something else. I'm Aaron Waltke and you're watching Live Long and Podcast. That would be amazing. And then we'll play it all the time. All
right. Sure. I'm Aaron Waltke, co-executive producer of Star Trek Prodigy, and I'm here to tell you to live long and podcast.
Love it. And thank you for that, Aaron. Jessica, what do you have anything you can talk about in your life right now with your different voice acting gigs, or are they all confidential? And
no, nothing. I'm just a baby voice actor, so that's
Yeah.
coming up for me. I'm just starting. So,
Just starting out. Well, I can't wait to hear you.
Thanks for having me here.
Thanks for being on.
I knew that the show was like, I felt the love in the show, but it was very neat to see the behind the scenes of how that love was crafted, because I felt it in every episode. It was amazing. I loved it so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And check out all the other great stuff we have here on Live Long and Podcast. We sometimes do our script reads, as mentioned, Star Trek Radio Theater. Most recently, we did Galaxy Quest. Go and have a listen to that. That was a lot of fun. We are currently doing reviews of Starfleet Academy every Thursday. We'll be on tonight covering the newest episode, Come Let's Away. That will be on at 8:30 tonight, and Chris Murphy will be hosting that. We are also doing Star Trek The Next Generations every Monday. You can look out for our next review. We'll be doing Tin Man from season 3, talking about that. And soon, For All Mankind will be coming back in March, and we will be picking up on season 5, leading off where that was left off in that show. So all kinds of great reviews and podcasts, all the time here on Live Long and Podcast and the United Federation of Podcasts. And we are going to sign off for today, I guess, as it's in the afternoon or midday if you're in California. I want to thank Jessica and Aaron once again for being with us, and Live Long and Podcast, everyone. And you have a great night. See you next time here. Bye. Ooh. Oh, where did they put it? Here we go.
Beam up some Star Trek content with Live Long and Podcast. A roundtable movie discussion with Hey, did you see this one? And take a peek into the darkness with Heard Noise, Must Investigate with Michael Chan. Watch us duke it out on trivial debates. And let's chat about TV with the Super Mater Brothers. It's all here on the United Federation of Podcasts.